Hi, I'm Sami, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Today I am bringing you Richard Moss, who he is a teacher. He is a former physician. He is all about awakening essential transformation. Now, what I find very fascinating about Richard, and I'll let him share his story in his own words, is that he left medicine at 33 to take a radical career pivot, with meditation and teaching. And what I find very interesting in our conversation we had before I started recording is that he talks a lot about the relationship with fear, which is something I feel like a lot of career changers and a lot of my own career coaching clients deal with, is that fear of possibly leaving their job, fear of the unknown, fear of actually going for that transformation, going for their dreams. But before I, give it all away, Richard, how about you just share in a nutshell a little bit about what you do?
Okay. Well, as you said, I was a physician, which is a wonderful grounding in science and science-based understanding. But when you're a physician, you work with people. And when I started being in medicine, which was in the 70s, and then into the late 70s, giving away my age indirectly, I suppose.
It's okay.
There was a lot more time. I could spend more time with people. We didn't have the technology that in one level makes things much easier, but also much more complicated and more bureaucratic. But long story short, I went from sitting with people, examining, working with them in an emergency room, in a hospital clinical setting. And when I left medicine, I had a background of those thousands of people I'd sat with in that way. I had a time period of just diving deeply into myself. I was young enough to not know where I was going, but at the same time, I was being guided and called, and I've written a number of books. If someone gets interested in me and wants to find out how I took my journey, they can go to Richard Moss on Amazon or richardmoss.com on the web, and they'll find out all that. So I won't spend too much time there. But here's what I've learned. The nutshell of it is medicine touches an aspect of human suffering, physical pain primarily. And that is actually very, very good contribution, a great contribution of medicine to the management of pain and many other things. And I'm the beneficiary at my age, 72, of having back surgery and a hip replacement and other things that I'm so grateful that the technology has gotten that big. But the true suffering we human beings deal with is emotional suffering. It's the suffering we generate in ourselves with our own thinking, and it's interpersonal. It's the suffering of people who love and then feel betrayed or abandoned, can't find a companion, are working with a partner or a partnership in business and then find themselves in distrust or betrayal. The interpersonal suffering, the relational suffering, is by far the largest form of suffering once you've somehow escaped from the grips of poverty. I mean, the inexpressible suffering of the refugees and people whose lives and futures are torn away from one day to the next by war and political conflict. That's horrible. But even there, the way we treat each other, the way we try to organize with our massive, massive population, ways of dealing with each other, the big suffering is right there between people. Giant suffering. And that's where I've spent my life working.
You know what I have noticed, because, just for the folks who are listening, Richard is the author of 7 different books, starting from the 80s, and his latest one was published in 2011. You've seen quite a change in how medicine, how energy, how people understand the connections between the mind and the body. What has been something that has struck you the most about this journey that us as humans, as the medical field, as the psychology field, as just, coaching, teaching, training, what has struck you as a very interesting evolution for us? You talked about how being a physician, you were able to spend more time with people. What is something that you feel like has been your biggest surprise in the last couple of decades in your various fields?
But the change is happening so fast. Technology, social media, the internet, it's changing things at a tremendous rate. It's giving blessings and curses. Scientific understanding, for example, I have a friend who's put 650 yoga teachers into veterans hospitals because she doesn't talk about yoga. She talks about upregulating the parasympathetic nervous system, downregulating the sympathetic nervous system. So these are, and we buy it because those are the scientific-based metaphors. The same thing is happening now in the neurosciences. We now have an understanding that we're using metaphors about left and right brain that are much more sophisticated. But the main thing that's happening in the acceleration is we're beginning to see that there is like a moral consequence to everything human beings do to be successful and safe. And it takes the form as the inefficiency of all forms of chemical and energy transformations, resulting in environmental degradation and climate change, and specifically warming of the climate. And that acceleration is on us. There's also the fact that social media and the way that we parse information is becoming more and more, it's becoming smaller and smaller bites. And as that happens, it's less and less substantial. It's more and more easy to polarize. And it's like we're going forward and backwards at the same time, because quite literally, a government can only be as good as the consciousness of the electorate. And we've always played the fear card in everything, even in medical training, and in the law, because I work with a lot of lawyers and I have a few friends that are lawyers. It's like, instead of inspiration, instead of realizing that we human beings are perhaps the first entities that we know of, certainly on this planet, mainly anywhere, that are becoming conscious enough of nature through science that we could actually choose to be obedient to nature instead of dominate nature. We are perhaps the first species that's became able to understand the nature of the very universe in which we live. No other creature out there knows that. Everything is governed by natural laws. We're the first creatures who can violate natural law or harness natural law, and then discover that the more we use it for our own ends, even if it seems to be wonderful, like housing and warmth and air conditioning, the end effect of billions of people all wanting to be safe, to feel good, to be successful, is a non-sustainable world. And that's what I've seen. It was so simple for me to go to school, to graduate medical school in 72. It was so different. And it's the way the law is practiced now, the way anything you write, an email, a text can be retrieved and used against you, who you can talk to and can't talk to in a legal context because of all that. It's just almost incomprehensible, the level of complexity that we've created. And what we've lost is a fundamental grounding in what we could call our own hearts, or our deepest human need, which is to love and be loved, to be seen, to see others really, not to see them through the prism of emojis and text messages, but to see people, to be heard. There's a whole generation of young people now that actually don't know how to relate to each other. There's a whole problem with what we're creating in a kind of digital autism. There is addiction to gaming. There's addiction to screen time. And some of it can really be of service to us, but a great deal of it is seducing our attention into places that are really, really dangerous if you spend too much time there. People are training their bodies, not living in their bodies. We have super athletes now, people doing extraordinary things, but the simple embodied understanding of the fundamental emotion of fear, that you journey with it instead of have it throw you into endless thinking, that you can journey with fear, that you can learn to treat fear. And this is kind of, everybody's running from fear, but if you personified fear, fear would be screaming at us, nobody ever loves me, nobody makes me safe in them. You see, there was some fear that was based in survival, but right now almost all fear is psychologically created by our thinking, almost all fear. And it's a feeling, it's a sensation. A lot of it goes away when we truly start to be mindful and contemplative and observe what we do with our thinking. But also there's basic fear, and you deal with it every day. In the legal profession, lawyers don't want to admit they're afraid, but they're terrified all the time. So many of them. In politics, people don't want to admit they're afraid. In business, in career, in developing an entrepreneurial life, you're in constant uncertainty. There's so much fear, and yet people don't know how to manage it. And
What
it's
I find,
very manageable.
what I find very interesting about, your observations is this idea that we have a world that has gotten somehow more connected, but we still feel more, but we get more disconnected. There's this ability to distract ourselves in so many ways, so we lose that sort of, taking a subtitle from your book, Inside Out Healing, we're losing that power of presence and what that means to kind of be in our bodies, to be with ourselves, to be with one person one-on-one without a notification of a text message or without an email coming in. So with you, when you're dealing, because we were talking before the episode about how you've presented at a number of conferences, you've done trainings at Harvard, University of Chicago, Stanford, UC Berkeley, and you're teaching in Europe this summer, as you frequently do. How do you feel like with trying to have people work with that fear? Because so much about personal development, I've noticed, is trying to always be high vibe, always have this frequency that is always jam-packed, as opposed to maybe sitting with that fear, trying to figure out what it teaches us, knowing how to know that this is a natural part of life, this is just a moment in time. How do you work with these professionals on managing their fear, whether it is of career change, whether it is of a life change, or whether it is of that next chapter? How do you kind of work with these people to manage that fear?
Well, I guess the great revolution of the Buddha was 2,700 or so years ago, was the understanding that for a human being, if you sit down right now, wherever you are, it's always now, and consciousness is actually sensation. So the further you get from being embodied and present in yourself, the more your mind takes you into the future. When you're in the future, there's always going to be something to be hopeful about and always something to be fearful about. They co-create each other. The future is infinite uncertainty and infinite possibility. So you can't outrun a sensation like fear. The more we try to create government to protect us from fear, the more we want to create science to protect us from fear, the more we want technology to protect us from fear, the very things we create imbalances that are destabilizing, create more uncertainty. And so how you do it is you basically have to start taking time. You have to start slowing down. You have to start giving away screen time. You have to stop running so fast, because you cannot run away from that emotion, that fundamental place inside of you that needs to be met and befriended. And there's no love. You cannot go deeply into intimacy with another human being, which we all want. I think it's probably the deepest want we have. I think it's the most grounded aspect of any sort of, let's say, spiritual aspiration, is really to love and be loved. And that will always bring you to fear, always. The fear of being annihilated, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of not being wanted, and you can have every kind of degree. You can be smart, you can be the top of the world in that way, and you still have these kinds of fears. And if you take all the stories about what kind of fear it is, fear of crowds, fear of people, fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of not being good enough, the actual thing is simply a sensation. And so I have people that work with me one-on-one privately over Zoom, over Skype, from all over the world. And I let them write to me a little bit about who they are so that we have a place to start from. Then we meet for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we stop talking. And I have already got a good idea of what they're dealing with in themselves. In other words, in their bodies, what they don't know how to journey with. And I start taking them directly into guided meditation. And once I've taught them how to build a certain muscle to get quiet right there in that moment in front of me, then all I have to do is take them to something that we're talking about. Anything from uncertainty in their business, anything, problems with their marriage, problems with health, problems with family. And there's always some place that just crystallizes in the body. And once we learn to start journeying and touching that, the next thing you know, very, very quickly, people are beginning to not be so afraid of these sensations, to not create the psychological environment, the projections and distancing from others that is, which indirectly, oddly enough, is exactly what the internet does, because you're building a reality from yes and not yes, 0 and 1. A binary reality in immense complication, in complexity, as computers get bigger and bigger, are simulating or creating a virtual reality. And yet the human body, and particularly the right brain, which is the presencing side of how our brain functions, it doesn't know how to recognize anything virtual. And there you go. With the left brain, it only can recognize something that is represented. It's representational. So words and structures and images, but nothing. The left brain of a human being cannot recognize its own body as alive. And there are experiments that I could talk about, but not in this time context, about how we know that to be a fact. The left brain can't recognize anything alive. And one of my clients helped to contribute, build Siri. And we had a conversation about AI. And I said, okay, well, give me an algorithm for consciousness. And he said, well, that's the one we can't do. But I said, well, what about love and compassion and forgiveness and trust and humility? Well, he said, if you could represent what love is in enough different ways that it could be described, and the computer was fast enough and the algorithm was complex enough, then without ever feeling love or knowing what love is, you could simulate love to a point, and none of us would really believe it. Not if you're in your body. You might believe it if you're in your head. This is where we are now, and it's fascinating as all get out. It's almost as if we're going so fast we have to go back and start over in our bodies. And starting over in your body because you're a marathoner and you do this and you do that, that's not starting over in your body, even though I've been over 7,000 feet in my years of mountaineering in the past. So I truly, truly love nature and being out there and doing all that. I did a lot of rock climbing, used to surf long ago. Wonderful. And still, that's not being in your body. Having been there, I know that's not being in your body. That's using your body.
Okay, so a lot of my clients are in the tech field, so they're very much those sort of people who are in their own heads. And a lot of times I find that especially if you're an intelligent person, the more intelligent you are, the more you can rationalize things, the more you can explain away stuff, the more you can really fool yourself. So you talk about meditation. Is meditation a way for people to kind of get out of their heads and back into their bodies?
Well, meditation is the most important art of all, and very, very difficult to describe. And many, many people teach it and don't really have a deep sense of it. You can't teach meditation until you've lived it deeply. The simple answer is people have to stop moving in order to see how they move. You have to go to a part of your mind that's grounded enough in your body to be able to see the part of the mind that's constantly moving and create a relationship with it. And so in my writings, in my teaching, just to help people get there, I teach them how to recognize the kinds of things their minds are teach them that create anger and fear. In fact, all emotions are created by thoughts or the reaction to images, whereas feelings are an innate form of intelligence. So meditation teaches you how to differentiate what the thinking mind is doing in terms of its emotional arousal, what the feeling self is experiencing, and how to be in a relationship to that, not a victim of it. Because if there's something you really feel good about, you're going to chase after it and become a victim of that. And if there's something that doesn't feel good, you're going to run away from it and defend against it, primarily by going into the mind. And so in the tech world that you're talking about, which has to do with coding and everybody trying to find the next kind of app or that'll be the breakthrough, this or that. The problem is if you don't balance it profoundly with time with music, with time with poetry, with time with dancing, with time in nature, with time with lovemaking, with time with being with children, the time with being with old people. If you don't balance it, if you don't consciously understand how to balance yourself, you get so imbalanced after a while that you will get sick emotionally, psychologically, and physically, but also you will project all of the unlived parts of yourself out into a world that you can't function in and make dysfunctional. Technology is an instrument for the heart, if it works at all. I don't mean the physical heart, I mean the soul of a human being. To the extent that technology can only be an instrument for concepts, and the concepts don't even start with anything living. Most politicians don't start from something living. They start from an idea, like socialism is bad, yet it's better to live in the socialist countries in Scandinavia in so many ways than to live in most other places on the planet. So yes, this is balance, balance, balance. And right now, society, technology, it's so left brain oriented, and the left brain can't recognize life.
That's very interesting that you say that, because one thing that I read about the change in Silicon Valley is that in the 70s and the 80s, these tech companies, when they would do, this is pretty common in a lot of companies, is to do a lunch and learn. And with these tech companies, they used to do a lot of these lunch and learns around Eastern philosophy or dance and these different ideas. Now it's all about growth hacking. It's all about virtual reality. It's about these really tech-heavy concepts. And one of the issues that they're dealing with AI is that a lot of the biases of the programmers are being programmed into these AI softwares. So whether that's racism or sexism or any other ism, those are being baked in because unlike back in the day, a lot of people came to tech from a lot of different fields. Now, one of the biggest suppliers of programmers and tech professionals is Stanford, so it's almost like they have this opportunity to bring people from all over the world, but they're only bringing in people from around the block, and it's creating almost like an echo chamber for a lot of these tech professionals, because they're creating these programs that are essentially mirrors, but they're not really dwelling enough within and also exploring enough externally to really create maybe a more thoughtful AI. What would you suggest for a tech professional or any other sort of careerist? What would be some interesting, whether it's books on philosophy or just schools of thought, what would you suggest for people just to become a little bit more balanced and well-rounded? What sort of books or media or art should they maybe try to pursue or dabble in?
Okay, well, let's let the body teach us. Music is distributed through both hemispheres of the brain evenly. Language starts out in the first months in the right brain, and then it's been completely sequestered into the left brain, so that if you have a left-sided stroke, you're paralyzed on your right side of your body, but you cannot talk. The way you teach people then to talk is essentially to teach them how to sound and sing those words. So the balance, like I said, for the people at the Veterans Administration using yoga is not about how athletic you can get with crazy postures. That's why so many people get hurt in yoga. The deep purpose of yoga is to balance the nervous system, what we call the autonomic nervous system. And so the things that we need to do to bring in balance, our bodies will already teach us. And for example, poetry. Poetry is the only way we have of using words that actually allows the words to both be metaphors and work both in the left and right side of the brain directly. the great songs of the world are simple, beautiful poems put to music. So when you hear a song in your head and you hear music and specific words come, it's showing you something. Music's become crazier and more fragmented in so many ways, and yet the Beatles remain exceptionally popular to this day. So balance through yoga, but not for athleticism, but to really learn to regulate breath, learn to really inhabit your body, learn to really feel sensation, learn to never overstretch, never force a joint, never force a ligament. Poetry, read poetry, sing. I've had a practice for 40 years every morning of singing extemporaneously or to melodies that I love, and making up my own words. And I teach people who are they're ill. They need more life force moving through them to get a book of poetry and read it, and then better still, try to sing it to their friends or sing it out loud to themselves. Just make up any melody you want to Mary Oliver, for example. All of these things, if we don't do them, you're going to be doing exactly what you're talking about. You become so self-referent to concepts that are generated in techno speak, in the technological language. Like, what did you call it? Hacking what?
Growth hacking.
Growth hacking. I mean, you can't. If you try to hack the growth of a human body, you will destroy it. You can't hack. We're beginning to hack the chromosomes, the genes. We have CRISPR devices that we can cut and splice the genetic structure. The problem with that is it's going to be in service to the people who want to use it for their own ends. And we're not starting from some deep life-affirming realization inside of us. So our education has always been survival-oriented. And unfortunately, the whole tech world has, without realizing it, is all about survival, economic survival. Primarily these days, economic survival, but just survival. Yeah. And
it's also very short term. It sounds like, you have seen a lot of the evolution, whether it's in business, tech, medicine, where we're going often towards these short-term solutions, whether it's to appease a shareholder or, to growth hack, which oftentimes, like I've seen working with startups myself, is that they try to grow too quickly and it leads to dysfunction later on in their organization, just the same as it would be in an organism. How do you feel like when we're working towards these very short-term solutions, how does that, I feel like there's almost like a thing where that does bring about that imbalance. Like, how do you suggest folks kind of think, whether it's, think long term or try to be more in the body? Like, I don't even know what I'm trying to ask here, but I feel like there is something to be said about letting things take their time. How do you deal with folks when they feel that fear of not reaching a goal or progressing quick enough?
It's still fear. The very nature of wanting is putting us into agenda consciousness all the time, which works in certain contexts, but just doesn't work if you want to ever enjoy your life or ever know love or be loved. I was thinking about a podcast I heard with, is his name Jack Dorsey, one of the founders of Twitter and also one of the co-founders of Square. And he is now a regular Vipassana meditator. He meditates an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. He exercises. He's a very, very disciplined guy. He's in his early 40s. And he's very aware that the problem with Twitter and the problem with the way the algorithms were set up, the AI was set up, it didn't allow for actually improvement and growth in the quality and the way we communicate with each other. So they're trying to build that into future generations of Twitter. That's a good sign. But the odd thing is they're trying to use the left brain, the representational world, the digitized, binary 0-1 world to teach us how to be in our bodies by giving us apps that'll tell us our temperature's too high or too low. Maybe we should stop drinking so much wine and drink so much water. He was using this kind of example, that the computer can be, you can get so much information, and we'll get more and more information, and bionic information about the body of the user right in real time, and that you could give them feedback in real time. But the thing is, if you're in your body at all, you know if you have a fever, you know if you're dehydrated. You don't have to be told how many steps you take. You can tell how your body feels because you're not exercising. In fact, we use the brain in a very narrow way most of the time now, even though people can be brilliant when they do it, to not even be able to understand the signals from our own bodies until we burn out. And depression and anxiety is rampant now. And as are so many other things. So the answer is balance. Balance. You need to realize you're suffering. You need to realize you're anxious. You have to realize that fear is normal, but the emotional and psychological fear, because you're not getting to where you want to go to, is purely mind-made. And until you start to use meditation or mindfulness or something along the work in my last two books, which is so clearly teaches us why we leave the now and how to become aware of how our minds carry us out of the now, what kind of emotion every kind of thought generates. Yes, thinking a specific thought like I'm not good enough creates an emotion. Thinking you don't love me creates an emotion. Thinking I really have to really perform well creates, all of them create anxiety and fear. Nobody's just operating from, God, I love relating to people. I'm Richard, the man speaking now. I am far more in love with who I talk to than all the knowledge and information I could ever have, or whether or not, or whether or not I'm loved. It's like we're so self-involved. We close our hearts moment by moment by moment with our self-involvement. Then we scare ourselves with our thinking, which makes us more self-involved, more isolated. And then we try to break that down because biology wants us, to have children, but also we want love. We want touch and affection. If you spend too much time in a computer, you're not being touched. And your nervous system, your immune system, just simply, if you're a baby that's not touched, your immune system won't develop. We need these things. We need these things, and they can't just be compensated by putting on your jogging clothes and sticking your headphones on or your earbuds in and listening to music or listening to someone else's mind while you're giving your body what you have been told is what it needs with this many miles or this many footsteps. You actually have to be in your body. It's far more intelligent. The total body is much more intelligent than the thinking mind. The whole body is much more intelligent than our feeling nature. But we're so caught up in thinking now, and left brain thinking, representational thinking, words and name calling and virtual reality and AI. But how do you teach AI to love? How do you teach AI compassion? How do you teach AI forgiveness? How do you teach AI humility? How do you teach AI empathy? You can't just simulate those things. Those things create an energy between two or more human beings that is a living field. It is delicious, and you can't simulate it. You have to get vulnerable and be with each other and communicate and learn how to. So those skills are necessary everywhere. They're necessary in medicine. They're necessary in the law. They're necessary within groups, within organizations, large corporations, smaller businesses. I consult for a number of businesses in the 250 people range, and changing those cultures is fun. And what you have is people that are happy there and trying to integrate, let's say 30 or 40 nationalities, as one of the companies I work with is trying to do in Australia. Wow, really incredible. And that's what we're doing globally. We've got to find a way that it's not just vision, but the culture we create is incredibly inclusive. And these are tech companies I'm talking about, or at least where they need enormous amounts of tech to function and to operate. And yet, how do you have those people be alive and have a real, we've got rooms now where they can walk in and the lights come on and bam, they can sit down and these screens change the environment in the background and they meditate. And they practice mindfulness, so they can do yoga. Another room with a gym where there's music that can actually cause deeper integration. So we could go on and on and on with this, but it comes back to get into the body, be in balance, and how we listen to ourselves, or to put it simply, the way we divide ourselves is the division we project out into the world. The way you divide yourself in your own mind is the division you then see in the world and react to in the world. And yet, how can you build a whole world from a 0 and a 1, from a yes or not yes? Because we can't imitate what the right brain knows in presence, we have gone from language and numbers all the way to where we are now, where the left brain is so dominant. This, again, is a science metaphor, left-right brain. It's evolving constantly in the depth of our understanding. We desperately need to balance ourselves.
Richard, we're getting to the end of the episode, but I feel like you have given my listeners, especially the ones in tech, a lot of food for thought. I really feel like this has probably been one of my most thoughtful episodes. We've gone through a lot of different topics that I feel like is something that, especially for my clients and my listeners who practice design thinking, they are user experience designers, that's really important for them to think about. Now, for any of my listeners who want to maybe reach out to you or want to, maybe recommend you to their company, how do they find you on the web? Let everybody know how they can connect with you.
Yeah, it's my name, www.richardmoss.com. I have a YouTube channel. But if you come to my website, which is a constantly evolving thing anyway, because my foundation is so rich, it's only relatively recently that the business world has realized we need help with our culture, we need help with creating balance, and I just have tens of thousands of hours of taking people through processes that bring them into balance, change their lives, help them psychologically and emotionally and physically. And it's fun for me. I mean, it's just, if people want to learn how to come into deeper balance for the sake of themselves, their organizations, and our planet, our societies, our cultures, they'll just resonate to what I've heard and just know intuitively, maybe this is a man to spend time with. It's easy to find me.
Excellent. And just to let everybody know, Richard's last book was Inside Out Healing, Transforming Your Life Through the Power of Presence. Thank you so much for being on my show, Richard. I feel like this has been, a good substantial bite to chomp on into, and I very much have enjoyed our conversation. I hope you've enjoyed being on the show.
I have, and I really appreciate you creating a context for this conversation. Thank you, Sami.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sami Gardner, your career specialist. Bye. Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.